And we're live. Good morning, everybody. Congratulations. You made it through the week. It's Friday. And if you're here with us, you're joining us for Food Safety Chat Live. This is a show that we do every Friday on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. And we go live and we talk about all things food safety. And we're here every Friday at the same time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, where Austin and I are at, or 10 a.m. Eastern. And if you've been a regular here on the chat, and by the way, I always get this reverse. Whoop. Go into the comment section here. Let us know where you're calling in from, where you're joining us from. And this is interactive, right? We're here for you, and we want to get your comments and your feedback and your information. And this is a golden opportunity. If you haven't been on the chat before, Austin Welch, co-founder of Save Media, is with us, and he is amazing. And I guarantee, if you're new with Austin, he is going to shift your perspective. So, Austin, good morning, my friend. How you doing?
Good morning, man. Doing great. Ready for springtime in Denver.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a lot of people don't know this, but March. So Austin and I are both in Colorado, and March is the snowiest month in Colorado. So and I think I saw the news here. What was it last week? This was what, the 2-year anniversary or 3-year anniversary of that giant snowstorm we had. It was like almost 3 feet of snow that everybody got. And part of the problem too is when the snow hits is it's warmer outside. So the snow isn't the nice, pretty little fluffy snow. It's the big, giant, wet flakes that are a pain to scoop. And if you've had a relatively warm spring, the leaves are starting to come out, and that's when trees get damaged and right. So luckily none of that so far.
Yeah, it's been nice so far.
Yep, definitely. So everybody, let us know you're out there. Put your hellos in the comment. We'd love to see that. One of the things that I always forget to do, right? And I need to put a Post-it note up by my computer or something like that. Because if you're new to the chat, one of our rituals here in the morning is a ceremonial drink together. So everybody join us for your favorite beverage. Cheers.
Cheers.
Very nice. I'm actually drinking an energy drink this morning in my coffee cup. So I'm fooling everybody, right? You think it's coffee. It's not. It's peach vibe from, was it, Celsius? Good stuff. Cara, good morning. Good to see you. Cara is going to be on in the next quarter for the chat. So always good having her on as well. So hopefully not too cold up in her neck of the woods. Alexis in beautiful San Diego. Always good to see Alexis. We got a lot to go over today. And this is an interesting perspective. And kind of kick off the conversation here this morning as well, Austin, is part of what I love about what you bring to the conversation is it takes us out of the normal technical realm that people who work in food safety and quality assurance deal with. We're all about numbers and audits and compliance and measurements and all these type of things. And those are all important, but really getting a good understanding of how to influence and how to lead within an organization, right? You can be the best food safety person in the world and know everything inside and out, but if you can't communicate that information and relate to other people who do other things in your company, you're not going to get a whole lot of traction. And I think that's where a lot of frustration comes from.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's the wheelhouse that I've kind of found myself in. Been an interesting road to here, coming from learning about motivation and behavior, all the way back from advertising days, back when I worked in marketing and advertising, and how to write copy that influences people, and so all of that kind of leads into led my trajectory to many different iterations until I found myself in the food industry.
It's kind of funny because that's kind of the way things go in the food industry. You don't go to college and say, oh, I'm a major in food, right? It's something you kind of happen to fall in. And that was my case, right? I started off in, my degree is pre-med, cellular biology and physiology, and started working for a medical device company and just found my way into food and started working in microbiology for a food company and it just went from there. It's not something you plan, which is very interesting. But that influence piece, right, and the advertising piece, and I think there's a tendency for analytical, technical people to look at the marketing and sales aspects in your company and go, yeah, whatever, right? But those are amazing skills, and they're super, super hard. And so having my own consulting business has given me an amazing perspective on these type of things and how it is that you talk and communicate with people so that they can understand who you are and what you bring to the table in the conversation. And I was listening to a live stream from Scott Adams not too long ago, and he was talking about, persuasion. He talks about this a lot. And one of the things that he talks about is you're doing it correctly if you're able to present a position or opinion, like in advertising and things like this, and then do this. And what you're thinking is, right, and you're able to lead them through that conversation where that next logical thing that they're thinking about relative to what you're talking about automatically leads to that. And then those people are going, whoa, get out of my head. You're driving me, what? How are you doing that, right? You have to be able to sit on the other side of the table and see their perspective and understand what it is that motivates them. And that's the skill set that people develop and who are really good at doing audits and plant tours and interacting with people who come to visit you at the production facility I refer to this as getting around to the other side of the table. So if you want to be successful in an FDA audit or a SQF audit or whatever, you need to be able to work with the person who is there evaluating your systems, not against. So you have to understand their perspectives. And as I talk about, right, is tell your story. So they understand why you do those things and you're putting it in a frame that they understand, right? And that skill set, those soft skills, super, super important.
Definitely. And that's why, I think that's why I found myself in the food industry, because after doing, training programs for just a wide array of different industries, I came across doing some work in this industry and was introduced to food safety culture and was like, this is basically the culmination of everything I've ever done. But here's an industry that really seems to need some help on the front of culture. And what you were talking about with, the friend of yours kind of leading that, being able to set something up and then saying what you're thinking is this. And that's the power of storytelling, which is a big thing that I talk about. Because with the appropriately told story, we infer the next thing that's going to happen. Right. And it's like, well, okay, this has happened and this has happened, therefore, or it's like, well, now I have this new question. And it's, as a storyteller, it's like, great, that was my goal, because I don't want to tell you what questions to ask. I want I want you to figure out those questions on your own.
Yeah, exactly. And it's what we do personally as entertainment. We watch a TV show and it's like, let's say Law and Order or something like this, right? And we get pulled into the plot. And then we're taken along for this trip during the course of that hour of, oh, wow, oh no, how can they not see that clue? And oh, the trial went wrong and the judge doesn't agree. And you go through this whole process and then you reach resolution at the end. That is completely different than how we handle training now, which is insane, which is, okay, everybody sit here. I'm going to force you to read this PowerPoint with me, and then we're going to take a test at the end. And we wonder why that information doesn't transfer, right? We don't do that. We don't have a PowerPoint. We don't have a PowerPoint for Law and Order, right? Okay. Slide number one, this is the potential suspect. His name is Jim Jones, and this is the prosecutor. He's a crazy maverick, and he's going to do something that the lead investigator doesn't like. And here's the snarky detective. No, you have a story that you go through this whole process. And that's what we need to do. And I think that's what is amazing that you guys do at Sage Media. So if you're not familiar with Austin's work, and that's why I advocate so much for his products and what he does for companies, amazing. So thank you for coming into this industry and helping us, because we need it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, and that kind of dovetails into what, we're looking to talk about today, which is getting started. When I first came into the food industry and was hearing all this talk around food safety culture, I had this background in sociology, psychology, philosophy, ethics, a lot of the gray soft areas of science. And I was really curious as to what food safety culture was. And I was like, there was all this talk, there was all these articles about it, but I was like, well, where's the playbook, right? Like surely with this much information, this many discussions and conferences and stuff, there's some type of playbook out there, because this is an industry governed by GMPs and HACCP and audit schemes and things like that. And it took me, I looked and I looked and I looked, for about a year or two, and I just couldn't find it. And then the harsh reality set in that it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's like, we're all doing this, right? Yeah, there's nothing on the horizon.
Yeah. And so, you and I were talking about this earlier. It was like, well, all of us are the Lewis and Clarks of this wild frontier. And so we're trying to map it out and figure out what does food safety culture mean? How do we build it? How do we grow it? What are the steps in place, the steps necessary to move forward? So I think that, it was good news and it was bad news. The bad news was there was no game plan. The good news was, well, here's our opportunity to create and forge the path of food safety culture based on our own experiences.
Right. And I think that's a great segue, because part of our conversation today is around that exact piece, right? Is, oh, geez, I'm just a quality manager. What can I do? I'm waiting for somebody else to do something. The VP of QA in the company is saying, who am I? I'm just the VP of QA. I'm just one person working at this company, and there's lots of other people running the company. I'm waiting for the SLT to do something, right? You can't wait. It doesn't work that way, right? You have to be able to influence within your organization, because the bottom line, harsh reality of life, even when I was running quality assurance at a major multi-billion-dollar company with hundreds of people reporting through my organization, that was still only a sliver of the company, right? You have to be able to influence outside of that. And as we were preparing for this chat, I was remembering I think it was like, some of these old Army sitcoms from the 60s, right? Sergeant Bilko and these type of things. And it was very interesting, because what the characters in the show would figure out where the real power was. It wasn't, and this was Baba Black Sheep was a good example of that, right? So you had, what was his name? Jim Conrad, right? He was the star of the show. But the person who had the power on the Air Force base wasn't the general. It was the procurement officer, because he had all the goodies. And he would decide who got what and what favors would, so you had to curry favor with the procurement officer, and he had this power and he knew it. And he'd be smoking on his big cigar. What are you? And that person had influence. We've also seen within organizations, and I think those old sitcoms from military works well for that too, is the bumbling base commander, right? Colonel Klink, Oaken's Heroes, right? Couldn't do anything, but he thought he was super powerful and running around and handling General Hochstetter and all these type of things, but that wasn't the real power within the operation, right? It was actually the prisoners who had all the power. And so understanding those dynamics. And if you're going to influence in the organization, you need to understand these. I remember at WhiteWave, I had a manager of supplier quality, fantastic team member. And he was very thoughtful and very reserved. And conversely, when he said, I've got something to say on this, everybody would go, whoo, and turn and listen to him, because what he was going to say was going to be profound, because he would take the time to think about it. So don't think that you have to be, the type A go-getter, I'm going to pound my fist and tell people, listen to me. Oftentimes that doesn't work. I mean, people will go along to get along, and you think you're making progress and you're not. And so you have to be aware of that too.
Right. And I think, one of the big things that I've been thinking more about lately and focusing on is a common refrain that we hear around food safety culture is that food safety culture starts at the top. Mm-hmm. And it's like, but I have talked to hundreds of people around the world around this topic. And the harsh reality is that a lot of times top level leadership does not care about this. You know, so in that situation, you know, I'm always confronted with, well, what do I do? Right. We have someone who leads the company, and really they're focused on the P&L, they're focused on production. And this is just never going to be a priority for them. And so it's like, well, then that's when you start to lead whatever you can around food safety culture within your own organization. And I guess it's a little bit of a rebel stance. But you know, I'm kind of a hopeful pessimist. There's an element, you know, where sometimes a tiger doesn't change his stripes. And so it's like, well, if this isn't going to be a initiative led from the top down, because with all the companies that I've worked with, it's very rare that we have top level leadership buy-in. That is a perfect world situation. And we don't live in a perfect world. So it's like, if we're going to continue to propel this concept of food safety culture and enhancing culture within our organizations, then we just got to take the reins and start to do what we can within our own little, you know, cosm of work.
Right.
Because and so that to me was another kind of eye-opening thing, because, you know, because we constantly talk about this top level buy-in, and it's just like, man, that 98% of the conversations I have do not sound like that, where they have that kind of buy-in. So how can we start to affect positive change within our direct reports or our peer group and things like that? Because that was the other thing, and you were talking about this earlier, when I talk to people and I ask them about the amount of authority that they have. I was doing a workshop at the Dubai conference and around designing training programs, and it was like, you know, as we're going through this and we're trying to figure out, you know, who are the people that you lead, and so many people didn't view themselves as leaders. And I was like, well, you do have a team that you work with, right? And they're like, well, yeah, but, you know, I'm beneath somebody else, and I have to, and so it's exactly like you said, no matter where you fall in the pecking order, there's always somebody above you, even the CEO that answer to the board.
Right.
So even the CEO could slough responsibility and be like, well, you know, this is what the board said.
Yeah. Darn it, it's not in the strategic objectives. Maybe next year, right?
Exactly.
Well, and part of that too, right, is perspective. Senior leadership in the company and the CEO within most food companies, they don't come up through QA. Operations sometimes, yes, a lot of times sales and marketing. They don't understand, right, what's going on. They don't understand the details. And how much face time do we get with them? Not as much as we'd like to understand and communicate to them these type of activities. Because you're exactly right. When the board of directors, right, and a lot of people don't understand this, the board of directors hires a CEO and gives the CEO the marching orders, says, okay, here are your objectives. You need to improve sales by this amount. You need to penetrate this market. We need to have whatever the objectives are within the company. And private or public, it really doesn't matter, right? It's going to be focused around value, right? And increasing those values. And there's certain things that are just assumed that are going to happen, right? So food safety is just going to happen, right? We talk about this on the show a lot. No, it doesn't just happen, right? It's something that requires a ton of work, but if you're successful at it, it looks like it happens automatically. And we have to fight through that and communicate. And again, the topic for today's discussion, right? Being able to influence. If you learn, it doesn't matter what you do, what level you're at, if you learn to influence outside of your direct responsibility, you're going to be successful, because that skill is imperative. And if you use the excuse that I don't have enough authority, if I just had enough to beat this into everybody so they do exactly what I say, it's never going to happen, right? And probably deep down inside, you know that, right? It just becomes a convenient excuse. Now, what do companies look for, right? They look for people who take initiative. And you don't have to design and create an entire system for your entire company. No, look at what you control. Look at what you have. Sit down with your peers, right? If you're in a production facility, right, you have the plant manager, let's say you're the quality manager, you have the maintenance manager, the warehouse manager, and that team of people, HR within that facility. You have control of that. Sit down with that team and say, okay, food safety culture, we all agree is important, right? Yes. Great. How do we get there? Because we're not there, right? We all know it. Well, yeah, we do. Okay, great. Let's put together a plan. And you don't have to, it's like that, how do you eat an elephant cliche, right? We hear that all the time. Start small. I've dabbled around in the software industry and created some products with joint ventures. And one of the things in the software world is the concept of MVP, minimum viable product. Because part of this is you don't want to do a whole lot of time and effort and money, right? Because these type of projects cost a lot of money, developing something that you think the market wants, only to find out that they don't. So you would create a product that meets the very basic requirements of what it is that somebody's looking for. And then you present it to them and say, okay, well, this does these type of things. What do you think? Right? And then you can pivot and you can twist, but you're heading down that path, right? There is no straight line. It's
Right.
going to be twists. It's going to be turns. And you have to be flexible in your approach.
Well, and even when we look at culture historically, right, these things don't just come up and here's the guideline for a society's culture. It is a lot of trial and error and learning, from mistakes and continuing to modify and figure out what does work for this group of people. Just like when we're looking at corporate culture or food safety culture, each company is going to have their own take on it. They're going to have their own approach to what works for them versus what works for somebody else. And I think this is where, having a specific guidebook actually is an advantage, because we can start to kind of figure out what needs to happen that works for us specifically. And that's a lot of what I'm looking at right now is trying, whenever I create these training programs for food safety culture, that is exactly what I try to do. I try to make it as open as possible. So when a company comes to me and says, we want to work on food safety culture, I don't want to create something just for the QA team. I don't want to create something just for ops. I don't want to create something just for administration. It's like this touches everybody. So how do we create, a story and a curriculum that's open enough and inclusive enough that it speaks to all of those different departments, and then they can assign their own value to it? Because I can't tell you what if you're the VP of quality, then you know your job way better than I'm ever going to know. So I'm just trying to provide a framework around how to start to apply your knowledge and your experience within this industry, within this company, within your plants, specifically to this, and allow that freedom for people to create that. And I think it's a big part of, when we talk about things like bottom-up leadership, that's one of the big things, is that it means empowering people to create these strategies, to bring their experience to the table and say, okay, well, here's what I know about the operation and what I think we could do to improve it. And I think that's a really important element to be able to incorporate into the organization, is that approach to bottom-up leadership, as opposed to waiting for the orders to come from on high.
Right. Because, the bottom line here, and I want to reemphasize what you just said, because I think it's so important, is every company has a culture, right? There's a way they do things. There's the craft way or the GM way or whatever. And so part of when you come into a new company is learning how things are done. What's the lingo? Who has the power? Who's the procurement guy, right? Who are the people who make decisions? And how does that actually work? So are decisions made in big meetings where people get around and argue and fight, and then by the time the meeting is done, there's consensus around what they want to do? Or are the meetings just a rubber stamp? The decision's already been made. It's been made in private between a couple of key leaders, and they're just there to have the meeting, right? All of these things are super important. And if you don't understand that, you're going to be in trouble. And a big piece of this is even within companies, there are subcultures. There's the marketing culture and the sales culture and the operations culture that are fitting into the overall culture for the company. How are the politics in that company? How do those operate? What's the culture? How do things get done? And this is a great example then of how you would start this, because actually turn that negative into a positive, because doing it this at the plant level is going to be much easier than doing this at the corporate level.
Mm-hmm.
And because if you're at the plant, let's say that you've been there for a while and you've been there for 5 years as the quality manager, and you know how things get done. You know that the plant manager makes the decisions and what she says is the rule. But the maintenance guys have a lot of influence because, whether things are working correctly or not and how they're allocating, you understand all of these things. And understanding that culture at that plant level and getting that buy-in for these different groups is super important. And once you understand that at the plant level, guess what? As you're just talking about, you can apply that technique on a larger scale. Because guess what? When you start doing this, people in other plants, people at corporate are going to notice. And then all of a sudden, the regional QA guys are coming in the plant and saying, this is different. Something's changed. Tell me about this. What's going on? Right now, you can start explaining that model and start expanding that within a company. As we're talking about this, one of the things that drives everybody nuts, right? We've all had a new person who comes into a company and you're working with them and they start saying things like, well, at my old company, we used to do it this way. And you're thinking to yourself, who gives a shit? I don't care. I don't care what your old company did. This is here. This is now. If you've got useful things that we can incorporate into how we do things, awesome. But just because you did it that way doesn't mean it's the right way.
Right. And that, because, just like with, society cultures, right? What works in one country or for one religion or for one group of people works for them, but might be completely different for somebody else. There is no right or wrong way. It's just what helps you to survive and to to grow within your group. But a big thing that you mentioned is that it's easier to do these things at a smaller level. So, a lot of the research I've done over the years is, and I'm actually looking to publish a course here pretty soon around how to create a speak up culture. So this has been a big topic that I've had a fascination with for years, going back to even before I was in food, around creating bystander intervention around sexual harassment. And so, but a lot of that information ties back into how do we get people to speak up within our, to bring hazards and risks to light. But one of the things about that is that there's this concept of psychological safety. So the feeling that people have that they are empowered and that they are safe to bring up issues to leadership without fear of any kind of repercussion or penalty or things like that. Yeah. And that concept of psychological safety, there's been tons of research done on this. There's a woman named Amy Edmondson out of Harvard, and she has a book specifically on this topic called the Fearless Organization. And what she found was that she talks about psychological safety lives at the group level. So going back to the military example, that group is like the platoon, right? Usually psychological safety resides within a group of 10 to 20 people. Beyond that, it becomes harder to, build psychological safety on a larger front, because just from an anthropological standpoint, as human beings, we're used to small tribes. Our trust only goes so far. And so this is why whenever we're also working with companies around these concepts of these organizational change, programs, a big part of what so many people want to do is the gut reaction is, well, let's create a video of the CEO talking about this change and what it means to the CEO. And I have to be, the realist and say, look, the people punching the clock at $13 an hour, they don't care. That's too far removed from them. Right. That's so far removed. If you're a $5 billion a year company, what's going on way up in that ivory tower, which is how so many of those people view that, it doesn't matter, but their direct day-to-day interaction with their team lead and with the peers and the people that they work with, that's what's important. That's the family, right? That's the brothers and the sisters. And so, I think that's one of the things that I've really learned over the years, is that starting up high and going with this massive change management effort is a huge struggle. It's like you said, the elephant, eating the elephant. It's starting in the middle and finding ways to start to grow and branch out from there. But then, but to stay consistent with these things, because the other thing about organizational culture, food safety culture, is that it's not something that happens through a singular training or events. It's the daily actions that we have to take. So it's like going to the gym, right? If I go to the gym once and come home and look for my 6-pack abs, I'm not going to see it. And I'm not going to see it after 3 times at the gym, and I'm not going to see it after a month at the gym. But over time, that consistency, now I have a culture of, I go and work out to try to become more healthy because I want to do X, Y, Z. Same thing with culture. And so I think when we look at that middle level leadership, it's like it's us being the leaders that we wish we had. Because sometimes we just don't have the leaders that we wish we had, and so we have to take that on and be that leadership.
That's super important, right? Because that's a personal decision you make yourself. Nobody can say, okay, congratulations, you're now a leader. That's never going to happen. Never going to happen. You have to, we'll keep the Army analogy going. You have to earn your stripes, right? You have to show that you have leadership capability. And we all do. We all do. And part of that, right, is advocating. And so part of that discussion is something we talk about on here a lot, right, is taking lessons externally and teaching the organization about these, right? So in some ways, providing those cautionary tales and helping to understand those things. And the analogy we've used on this chat, if you're familiar with the channel, right, is part of our big roadblock in improving food safety and building these cultures is visibility. And we don't get to see, when there's a large food safety failure, what the follow-up was. We see the carnage of the wreck, but we don't see what was done to move afterwards to get the car back on the road and get going again. And what we talk about is the airline industry, so the National Transportation Safety Board. If there's a failure in aircraft, and so the example we use, right, was a tragedy with Kobe Bryant and his helicopter wreck, where him and the pilot and his child were killed. Very, very public, right? Just like a recall, very public. But the difference is the NTSB went back and did an investigation, and it takes them some time. And then they come back and they say, here's what we found. Here are the things that didn't work and the different factors that added up to create this issue. And as a result of this process, we see improvements in airline travel over the last 30, 40 years, where it's far safer than driving to the grocery store. And that didn't happen by, pardon the pun, by accident. We need to take those type of things in food safety and learn from those and use as examples and help to teach those.
Definitely. And I think what's really interesting, the 483s are all public. So yeah. I can go in and I've actually been doing this recently, just pulling up old 483s and saying, okay, what can I learn from the 483 on what went wrong, or what could I hypothesize went wrong, and how could I learn from that and to make sure that I don't fall prey to that same issue. So I think that would be a great exercise for anybody to go back and look at those 483s and say, okay, well, here's, don't let any crisis go to waste. So let's look at PCA. Look at, I was reading the GIF one recently. I was looking up on WALA. So just to find out what exactly happened here and what can we learn from these situations, because typically there was some type of failure within the culture, within the company that led to that. So we start to have to think critically about that. And it's like, okay, well, if we're seeing things around a gap in GMPs, well, what could have happened? Why could that have possibly happened? And what could have been done differently. And so it starts to get us thinking in these hypothetical situations, and then going, well, okay, could that happen in my own company? And
right. Well, the advantage of that too is it's removing the barriers associated with your company, right? Because if you're talking about failures in your company and things, people get defensive. It's like, whoa, hold on a minute here. What are you saying? People start defending your company. And so if you look at external examples of highly respected companies that have failures, it provides a roadmap and say, hey, listen, we're doing pretty good here, but this company thought they were doing good too. What went wrong that we can learn from? And it's just not limited to the food industry, is it?
No, I mean, there's so much that I learned. I've even written articles about this because the way my brain works, I'm always trying to synthesize information that's is seemingly disparate. And I put a post out just a couple of days ago on LinkedIn about, how, music that I work on in my free time and how that informs my work life and how what I learn from work informs my music life. Because, within music, you have to work with other people and sometimes that's hard and frustrating and you have creative differences. And so I learn from my organizational work, how to take those skills back into the practice room. But yeah, there's so many different areas that we can look at. So like getting out of the food industry, aerospace, right? You were talking about the NTSB, but specifically, looking at, say, Boeing, right, with the 737 MAX.
Yeah.
That was a massive issue. And when the NTSB came in, they blatantly said, there's a culture problem here. Something happened within the culture of Boeing where you shifted from a safety first mindset to a profit driven mindset. And that needs to be addressed. Looking at even looking at Volkswagen and the big fiasco with Volkswagen where they had the sensors that would help it, pass inspection. And it's like these things crept up as a result of the culture. And so trying to figure out like what could they have done differently within the culture and start to think about that. Because I think the big thing is that I don't believe that any of these very few of these organizations are just evil, right? And just say, screw everything, we're going to do this. It's a insidious, slow process of bad decision making that leads to this massive issue.
Right.
The 737 MAX, those Boeing engineers didn't want to put out a plane that was going to kill people. But there was something that happened internally where they were like, well, this is a good idea to do this. And even though there were some naysayers, the naysayers were not listened to.
Right.
And so, there's so many different, issues or opportunities to look at culture from outside of the food world. Wells Fargo, right? Wells Fargo had the big checking account scandal a few years ago where they were opening fraudulent checking accounts.
That's right. Yeah. Remember that. Yeah.
Massive fine. It's just everywhere you go, but you can also look at, companies that have great cultures and say, okay, well, what can I learn from these other companies with these great cultures? So Zappos shoe company is consistently used as an example of like a company with a great culture. So kind of looking outside and then trying to synthesize that information and say, well, how does this apply within our own realm?
Right. Well, and it has to be authentic, right? If a company says, all right, we're going to put forth an image of having a good culture, it's fake, right? It's not going to work. It's not going to work. So part of this too, right? A couple of comments, relative to these examples, right? Is synthesizing data from different disparate sources is a sign of intelligence, right? Being able to take two things that are completely unrelated and put them together and link that together, right? That's Einstein, right? Those, looking at things from that new perspective. Another indicator of high intelligence, right, is the ability to pretty much rationalize anything you want to rationalize, right? We've all seen this, right? You argue with somebody and they can come up with all kinds of crazy reasons that look insane from your perspective, but they've rationalized this internally. So a lot of times, and that's why it circles back to what we were talking about earlier, you have these hidden cultural statements or unspoken rules that you have to figure out. So maybe within the Boeing organization, and this is 100% speculation, maybe there was an unspoken rule that got somehow injected into the organization innocuously, right? Somebody may have said something at a high level of, they had a bad quarter and they're like, we need to turn this around.
Right.
And somebody took that and said, oh, what this means is profits are now more important than safety. Got it. Right? And off they go. Right. And that's all in their head. That's how they interpreted that. And that cascades down. And people in the company now are going, whoa, what? I don't agree. Shut up. Right. This is the mandate from senior leadership, and we're going to do this. And it may not even be a mandate at all. You have no way of knowing.
And then you start to develop these new norms around that assumption. And this is one of the, this is the other thing that, when we look at, the definition of food safety culture, it usually talks about it's the values, beliefs, and norms of an organization around what is safe. And values and beliefs are really hard, right? These are esoteric, philosophical, constructs around, how we try to define, what someone feels or thinks about a certain thing. That's a little bit out of our pay grade, to work on values and beliefs specifically. But I think it's the norms. That's the element where it's like, okay, we can work on the norms, and the norms will lead to new values and beliefs. So that's one of the things I'm always looking at is like, how do we simplify this process as much as possible? Well, the norms are the behaviors that are, commonly held, accepted behaviors within an organization. So if we can address those norms, well, I can see a norm, right? I can see a behavior. This machine gets cleaned at this point in time, come hell or high water, right? So it's like, this is what's going to happen. And so those norms start to inform what essentially is the belief system, because it's like, well, this is what we do. Therefore, we obviously believe in, sanitary equipment, or making sure, I was talking with a health agency the other day, and it's like, they want to kind of create this culture that shows that, people should be calling in sick when they're actually sick. Right. So it's like, don't go into the restaurant if you're vomiting or have diarrhea or fever with a headache. But it's like, part of the organization's responsibility there is that they have to offer sick time, right? Because by offering sick time, you are saying this is part of our belief that you will not be punished for being sick. Because we ultimately do not want you here if you were throwing up, right? It's too big of a risk factor. So there's a lot of intricate elements that we look at, but those norms, to me, that's one of the big things that I've been focusing more attention on lately is developing the norms and finding ways to drive that, because very rarely do we, there's the idea of that we act our way into a new way of thinking, right? So it's not like not that I get this new information and now I behave differently, which goes back to what I talk about a lot, right? Knowledge does not equal behavior. But I act my way into a new way of thinking. I don't, and this gets back into a lot of the motivation theory and how, fascinating research coming out of medicine, right? The amount of people who don't take their heart medication, they know they need it. They know they're sick. They know if they don't take it, they're going to die. But the success rate of people taking that medication is super low. And so it's like, they know that they should be doing it, but there's all these different, reasons that come into play that keep them from behaving in that certain manner.
Rationalization. And I think you're really onto something here as well, right? So I think that actually starting at a smaller scale is the way to go, because now you've got a little playground. And you can then begin experimenting and looking at different things. And number one, as we talked about earlier, there needs to be trust, right? And so working with that senior leadership team in that facility, right, and helping to lead this effort, and actually, wait for it, talk to people, right? Because if there's a hidden belief that, All right. Plant management says that food safety is very, very important, but there's a hidden message that says, but we got to get the product out the door, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the supervisor understands that to mean that means I need to hit my quotas for production every day, no matter what. You've got a conflict, right? And the only way you're going to figure those things out is by talking with different people in that organization and saying, "Tell me about your job." So, all right, you've been a supervisor on this production line now for 15 years. What's your day look like? How are you doing things, right? And you'll start teasing out these hidden values and norms that you're talking about. And when you find those, you can then talk with the leadership team in the plant and say, "Hey guys, we've been identifying this within the process, and we need to kind of take a look at this." And yeah, never doing this in an environment of punishment, right? It's if you do that, it's over, right? Because then everybody's going to clam up. They're going to see what happened to Bill, and okay, all right, tell me what to say, and I'll say it. But that's not what you're doing.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things around creating that culture where people can speak up and bring these things to light. Is they've got to be able to see that they can do this without fear of repercussion around it. And that requires, once again, it's not a singular training event that's like, here's what we do here. It's what people see every single day, and specifically what they see in those high risk environments, right? Where someone brings it up on, the second week of December going into Christmas, like you always talk about, and it's everybody's running around like their hair's on fire, trying to get the orders out. And then it's at that point in time that someone says, "Hey, there's an issue." Everyone's looking to see, how are you going to respond? Are you going to stick to your guns and stick to this culture of we put food safety first, or are you going to cave? Because that under fire, that's where we actually see what the real culture is.
100%. So
I'd be interested real quick to hear from some of the audience and thoughts around this concept. I feel that it's a little rebellious in a way, so I'm I'm curious to hear what people think of this, but also what is there anything in particular that's keeping you personally from beginning this journey around food safety culture and starting to affect your direct team? Because I'm always looking to gather more real world data from as many people as I can of like, what are they struggling with? What specifically do you need help with when it comes to this topic of food safety culture? Because that's basically, I learn from everybody out there, and then I try to find some type of solution to provide back.
Definitely, yes, everybody. Yeah, definitely. And so if you want to respond offline, right? Because talking about these things in public may not be the right way to do things either. So Austin's email is right there. He's super responsive. Get with him and talk about these things. As you're hearing in this conversations, companies are unique, but there's commonalities. People are people, and getting to those root causes and understanding motivations and how people operate and what they're thinking and how these things impact them is really, really important. And a big piece of this then is, why me? Why the quality person? I've got enough stuff to do. Why do I have to worry about these new things? Change is hard. You're talking about things that make me a little uncomfortable. I'm not used to this. I'm used to my KPI reports and my Six Sigma variants and all these type of things. We're kind of getting into some stuff I'm not too comfortable with. But here's the golden thing, and I think the reason why this really belongs with us in food safety and quality assurance is we hold the moral high ground in companies. We are seen as the people who are the arbiters of what's good, right? We determine if the product is good or bad, pass or fail, ship or not ship, and we help set those standards. The quality group in a company is part of that group that sets the rules of the game, as I call it. We work with all these other different departments within a company. A lot of other departments, they'll work with other departments when they need to, but they're kind of doing their own thing, right? Procurement, maintenance, whatever, right? They're doing their things. We're the group that oversees everybody, and we're kind of sticking our nose into a lot of different stuff. Perfect, right? We are that group, and using that external information to help teach the organization, right? Why are you listening to this right now? Right? You want to grow, you want to learn, you want to help improve, and you care. right? You're investing an hour of your week to be here to learn these lessons. And the way I always look at trainings and things like this, when you go to a conference and you listen to a presentation or whatever, if I can pull one new little thing out of that and implement that, that's really important, right? Don't just gather information, oh, this is useful, and I'll, and then file it away on your shelf. What's the point, right? What's the point? And it gets back to the MVP example earlier. Software guys understand this, right? You don't need to invent. We get updates, right? How many updates do we get on our phones from Apple or whatever? All the time, right? All the time. They are constantly improving and iterating their products and things like that. You don't need all the answers. You just need to know where to start.
Yeah. Which actually, that's a great segue into, I'm actually writing a book right now on that exact thing, how to get started around this topic of food safety culture, which is also another reason why I'd love to get additional information from everybody out there on what they're struggling with, because I want to create something that's as applicable as possible. But I'm utilizing the same framework in the book as I do with the companies that I work with, to keep it as open as possible so that the reader can kind of apply their own experience and knowledge around what works for them and their organization, while also providing some kind of best case scenario stuff that we've learned along the way. But how to start to lead that culture initiative with these just small steps to start getting going. And first of all, it's, kind of learning how to lead yourself. What are some of your own internal restrictions around food safety? Or do you fall prey to the, well, it's good. We'll do food safety up until this point, and starting to find some of our own restrictions that we might have around behaving and having a certain norm. But then starting to figure out how do we encourage people to speak up? How do we start to create that group psychological safety? How do we start to create goals and KPIs around food safety and food safety culture? Because we do want to be able to measure our progress. We want to say, okay, well, here's our starting point, and here's where we've progressed to. So being able to offer all of those things within, a short book that is affordable. That was one of my big goals. I wanted to keep it affordable and something that's easy to get through, so I'm thinking 150 pages max.
I love it. And this circles back to the beginning of our conversation perfectly, right? Which is, there's no roadmap out there. Well, we got a whole bunch of cliches thrown into our talk here today, but like many paths to the top of the mountain, right? There is no step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, right? You need to figure out what's right for your company. Even in the same industry, dairy, produce, or whatever, every company is unique. And within that company, every plant is unique. We all know that, right? If you worked in quality at the corporate level, you know that every single one of your plants is different, right? You have some plants that you don't have to worry about at all. And you have your other plants that are your problem children. And you have to go there all the time and work with them and help them and all these type of things. It's just the way it is, right?
Right. And that's one of the common questions I get at the beginning of these engagements with different companies is they'll be like, well, have you ever worked with a feta cheese manufacturer in the Midwest with 5,000 employees that they have these hyper specific things? And it's like, no, I haven't. Cool. But do you employ people? Because it's that we know the consistency around people and the way that people are motivated and think and are driven. But then we find out what works specifically for your company. So right. Even if I had that experience with that hyper specific request, it still wouldn't apply because this is your own company. It's completely different from any other one.
Right, exactly. So part of this then too is building that support network. Don't do this alone, right? And you hear me talk about this all the time. Don't be Moses. Don't go to your office, create a bunch of documents on, here's our work instruction for food safety culture. Mm-hmm. And then come down from the mountaintop carrying your tablets to anoint the people. You're going to fail, right? People are going to resist, 100% guaranteed. You need to get consensus. You need to get buy-in. You need to talk with people, right? And that's where you need to start, is sitting down in one of your staff meetings at the plant level and say, hey guys, I've been listening to a lot of this stuff around food safety culture. What does that mean to you? Right? Ask questions, right? Don't dictate, ask questions and build that trust. That's super important.
Super important. And that curiosity shows humility, right? And that's what employees need to see, is that no one here has all of the answers. And so we're all leaning on each other to grow. And that's kind of the second part of the book, is really just walking through a lot of those activities of how to start to build that trust within the team and to facilitate those types of meetings, but finding a way to not come down from the mountain with the tablets, as you said, but instead, what I'm trying to really focus in on in the book is, here is how we can create consensus, get buy-in, show that the workers have some form of autonomy and some type of say within the work that they do, because this gets into a whole other conversation around like finding meaning in our work. And this is what so many people want, and what they lack is that they don't have meaning in their work. And if they can identify some type of meaning, then they're going to be such stronger employees, because like now it holds some type of value.
Right. And that's where, and again, right, this is another advantage of starting this at the plant level. If you're in this is what I love about production facilities. If you're working in a plant, at the end of the day, you can walk out to the warehouse and look at the racks and say, we made that today.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's much more concrete, right? If you're at corporate, things become more abstract, and this is probably right how things get astray because of that, and people can rationalize and justify. When you're at the plant, everything comes down to that product, right? Did we make a good product? Did we make a safe product? Are we making our consumers happy? Right? It all comes down to that, and figuring that out and teaching that message to your team. I love Kim's comments here. So behavior modification is difficult. People need to trust, right? And the bottom line here, and this is probably a good way to end the conversation too, is that people don't care unless you show that you do, right? You have to, if they get the sense that you're using them as a tool to get what you want, forget it, right? It's collaborative, right? You're there to help and create this thing together, not because there's some requirement in a standard that says under 2.1.2 we need this. No. Right? That's, who cares, right? You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And that whole thing, right? Go walk out in the warehouse, right? Go walk out in the warehouse. I love that.
Yeah. And, the other thing Kimberly said here is, I'm learning I need to make more efforts to learn culinary processes and spend time with the culinary team. Going back to the military example, I think about these military books where they talk about, the new fresh lieutenant comes in from university and wants to lead, and the lieutenant hasn't earned street cred yet. And so that's part of the deal. And Melody G talked about this, I think it was last week or the week before, when she goes out on the plant floor, she wears what her workers wear. She doesn't go out in a suit. She because she literally does not want people referring to her as a suit coming out onto the plant floor. She needs to be part of the team. And so she makes sure that even just environmentally that she looks the same as them. And so that's an important aspect of finding that ways to connect with the team in a way that they will trust you.
100%. And that's a perfect place to end on this. And remember, right, what we do in food safety goes far beyond what we do in a particular company or a plant, right? It's part of a collaboration because we're building this together. The consumer doesn't view us as separate, right? We're all in this together. And I applaud you for being here today. So one of the action steps I think I would like to ask you, right, is be part of that. Reach out to Austin and help him in this project and give him your perspective, right? It's exactly what we're talking about here today. Tell me about what that means to you. How do you manage these things? And what have you seen? What are the challenges, right? The more we understand about this collectively, the better off we're going to be in the product, and the more we're going to be able to apply it to specific instances. And that's the important piece of it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that would be great. So yeah, if anybody has some additional questions or war stories that they want to share around this topic. I'm looking to gather as much as I possibly can. So yeah, if you please feel free to send that information over to me, and I'll keep it confidential, so there will be no names referenced in future food safety chat talks. But yeah, that because I'm learning from all of y'all on how to continue to create this concept of culture.
Awesome. Yeah, this is an important project, and thanks a lot, Austin, for taking this on. This is a big one. I really appreciate it. So glad we've been connected. I've enjoyed working with you here on these type of things and our friendship. So thank you very much for that.
Sure thing, man. Same here.
Great. So thanks, everybody. Awesome chat. God, I mean, so much to think about, right? So go away from this chat and digest, right? Start integrating what we're thinking in here and figuring out, again, how am I going to move forward with this information? And it could be just reaching out to Austin and starting the process, right? So do that, use this. And your other action, join us back here next week for the next food safety chat. We're always live on Fridays at this time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next chat. We'll have another amazing guest on next week. So thanks, Austin. This was a great chat. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Have a good weekend.
Great, everybody. Have a great one. See you next week.
Bye.